Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to another knowledge bomb dropping episode of Lead to Greatness, where we believe in helping others reach their greatest potential and together change the world. Today on Lead to Greatness, we have Mark Rockwell. If you haven't done so already, go ahead and subscribe. Hit that notification so you won't miss an episode. Mark helps frustrating business owners build healthy, thriving companies. Mark is both an attorney and an entrepreneur. He has started and grew several companies during his career, and he also struggled with the same frustrations and setbacks all company owners experience. Please help me welcome Mark with Executing Like a Champion.
This is Cedric Francis, and you're listening to Lead to Greatness.
Raised over in a little farming community in central Washington called Sunnyside over near Yakima, a great idyllic little farm town. My dad was a dentist, but we lived out in the country. So I had the fun of working on our neighbor's dairy farm. They were Dutch immigrants. And so I spent most of my youth driving tractors and showing Holstein calves in 4-H fairs. And it was delightful. I was paid $10 a month to clean this large grade A dairy barn every morning. It took me about an hour. So I got really good at scooping poop and washing walls and scrubbing the troughs and coiling hoses. I got to tell you, no one can coil a hose better than I can. My aunt, one time, I can remember when I was about 12 years old, we were on a trip to Washington, D.C., and she said in a serious tone, knowing that I worked on the farm, she said, "Yes, I'd like to introduce you to Mark. He's a pilot. He pilots it here and he pilots it there." So lots of piling in my youth. One of the key things that I remember with fondness was I always had somewhere between 10 and 12 young calves to feed. And, unlike some jobs, not to demean them, but whether you're mowing lawns or delivering newspapers, if you didn't deliver the newspaper that day, someone probably was just irritated. If you didn't mow someone's lawn, they were probably ticked off. But if you didn't feed or water the calves, or put them in the barn, or lock the gate, or put fresh straw down for them, it probably meant one of them either at the very least got sick or possibly even died. So as a little boy, I learned the responsibility of really not only taking care of livestock, because that was my responsibility, but I also learned to love the livestock. And that was a great life lesson on several fronts. The farmer, who was a wonderful Dutch immigrant dairyman, Bert Warmenhoven, he didn't smoke very often, but in the springtime or in summer, we'd go off to buy hay. And I can remember cruising across the country in his big Roadmaster Buick. And that would be one of the few occasions he would light up a cigar, and he would be over there driving. And I would be this little 8-9-year-old sitting over on the right-hand side. And we'd be talking about the price of hay and the price of feed. And frankly, at 8 or 9 years of age, I felt kind of like I was his partner. And so I look back at that, of course, with a lot of fondness. And I think that probably planted a seed in me that this business thing is kind of interesting. During college and law school, I drove truck on heavy construction. And I talked to a couple of fellows who own trucks and lease trucks. And I thought, boy, that's pretty neat. Even though my family wasn't wealthy, I thought, wouldn't it be cool to buy some trucks and lease them and make some money and get some tax benefits? So while I was in law school, I had 8 Peterbilts that ran all over the United States and Canada under a license for a company called International Transport. And among other things, we hauled jet engines from Boeing Field in Seattle all the way back to Pratt & Whitney in Hartford, Connecticut, for them to be rebuilt. And those were really a valuable engine. They were like $1 million a piece. And this was back in the 70s and 80s. And so during my time in law school, I thought, wow, I just really kind of like this business thing. And so while I really do not regret ever having gone and graduated from college and having passed the bar, I really became more fascinated with the energy of business than the tedium of law.
Wow. What are some mistakes that you think a lot of entrepreneurs make in the beginning that may lead to that business failure?
I really, Cedric, believe that the typical business person is bright, they're hardworking, they have a concept, they're willing to work 18 hours a day, but they haven't given a lot of planning and thought to their business. They probably have a product, they have an idea. It's either to open a cafe or to sell a particular product. And so they work really hard and they get some sales and they actually start to make a little money. And then they hire someone and then they make a little more money. And before you know it, they have 6, 8, 10 employees and they're selling a fair amount of product. But you know what? There is no organization. There is no real plan and there's no foundation. It's like having built a house, and the house actually from the exterior, from the distance, kind of looks fairly attractive. But as you get up closer, you go, oh my gosh, there's no foundation under this thing. The first wind that comes along, it's just going to blow it over.
Wow.
And so I use the illustration. It's a little bit hokey, but I think it makes the point. I tell the story of it's like 2 or 3 business people who go off to a trade show and they come home and they have 15 business cards that they picked up at the trade show and they just throw them in a box. And you walk in and say, hey, Mark, where's that Chuck Johnson's contact information? And I rifle through the box real quickly and I pick it up with glee and show it to you and off you go. 5 years later, you walk in and now there's 5,500 cards in the box and none of them have been organized. And metaphorically speaking, that's how the business has operated. And so where you started out with the owner knowing every invoice, every customer, every employee, every part number, he no longer does that. He no longer knows that. And what happened, Cedric, is they hit the ceiling. Suddenly, the lack of systems and processes that weren't apparently necessary when the business was really tiny and the business person could keep it all in his head or her head is simply not adequate. Once in a while, where that becomes apparent is someone calls up and says, Cedric, we really like doing business with you. And you've always been great about service and quality. I don't know how to say this, but those last 2 orders we got from you, they're really not up to par. And suddenly you realize, wow, something's going on. What's wrong? We're working harder than ever. We've got more customers than ever. Well, the problem is you've now gone beyond your ability to cope because there is no process. There is no standardization. There's no consistency. And so I say to people, you have to understand you can't scale until you can achieve consistency. And you can't achieve consistency unless and until you have systems and processes in place. And a lot of people rebel against that because they go, oh, well, that's why I left the big corporation. I never liked those processes and procedures. Well, yeah, they can become stifling in a big organization. But if you have no process and no procedure, you'd better be prepared to stay at about a 2-person firm, because beyond that, you're going to have a lot of confusion and a lot of disappointed customers. The first question they have to ask themselves, and very few do, I don't think I asked it myself, why am I in business? And of course, the immediate answer for most people is going to be, well, hey, dummy, to make a living. No, it goes beyond that. It's not just an answer to make money. It's why am I in business? Simon Sinek, who's a really popular speaker and has some great videos, you can find this on YouTube, has written a book called Start With Why. And he tells the story that everybody can say what it is they do, and they can say how they do it. But very few people can say why they do it. The last business I started was about 2008, 2009. Was a senior healthcare business where we provided care, 24/7 residential care for people living with Alzheimer's disease. And when we started our business, we were pretty thorough and we put together one of those kind of standard sounding vision, mission statements that were pretty vanilla, not very memorable. And after reading Simon Sinek's book, I thought, we need to really be more intentional about this. We need to really make this mean something. So I had this hypothetical story in my mind, which was really more than hypothetical. And that is, if you can picture this, a son or daughter comes in to one of our communities and asks to speak to the executive director. And they start the story by saying, Dad's just not safe anymore. He wanders, he's getting into trouble. We got a call yesterday from the police saying that he'd gone down to the Rite Aid to get his prescription filled and he was lost, he was confused. And so we know he's not safe. So we really need to put him somewhere that he can be cared for and kept safe. And secondly, we know that even though he's not in his 30s, we don't want him to just sit and watch TV. We want him to be involved. We want him to be active. And then lastly, as the person is turning, I could see the individual turning and saying, I know this is a lot to ask, but could you just love him? And so out of that came our why, which was to protect, which is the safety piece, engage, which is the involvement piece, and love. And so our why statement became to protect, engage, and love people living with memory loss. And that became very motivational. That became our anchor. That became our guiding star. And, sadly, most people don't have that. And so if you don't have that guiding star, that real deep ingrained purpose, there is nothing to hang anything on. So that would be my first statement to anybody. Really challenge yourself. Why am I doing this?
Mark, that is a knowledge bomb. That is very important. And I love the way you walk through the mind of what the client or the family is actually thinking. You walk through that and you came up with the purpose based on the client and not based on what you think. Starting with the client in mind. I want to ask you, so how long did it take you to walk through this process?
Cedric, it's been, 10 years since we've done it. I know that when I took it on, I had two partners and I said, obviously I want your buy-in. I'll champion it. And I got with a person who was a good copywriter. And I worked with him only because I love words. And I figured if I brainstormed with somebody else, it would help me through the process. And I would say I probably had 3 to 5 meetings with him where we would walk through the story. We would edit the story. We would, we didn't want it to be too short. We didn't want it to be too long. We wanted it to be genuine, believable, heartfelt, and something that was really gripping and would be motivational and sincere, and something that we could share with the families that in a very brief one-line sentence expressed our passion and our commitment.
You said something. I keep hearing you say this, and I want to touch on this because you have a lot of long rangers that starts business and want to do things on their own. And I keep hearing you say, every time you're talking about anything, you're saying a partner. Why do you try to get a partner and not try to do it yourself?
Well, I wouldn't say that everybody needs a partner. Okay. But I do think that the realities are God blessed us each with individual skills. Yeah. And my skill set may not be your skill set, and your skill set may not be my skill set. And every business, particularly as it starts to grow, requires different strengths. For instance, in my coaching business, we always talk in terms of there's multiple roles, but 2 very specific roles. One is called the visionary, the individual who has this mental picture of what the business is going to be, where it's going to go, how it's going to get there. And that individual oftentimes is not real good at making the trains run on time. They're so tied up in creative thinking that greasing the wheels and restocking the water bottles to get the airplane off on time is not necessarily their skill set. Contrary to that, the individual that you want to run the trains and keep them going on time, the bandmaster, so to speak, is oftentimes not very visionary. They know exactly what needs to be done. They know how the trucks need to be loaded. They know how the scheduling needs to be handled. They know exactly what inventory needs to be in the warehouse. But if you talked about where the business is going to be in 5 years or what it's going to look like, that oftentimes is not their skill set. It doesn't mean that there aren't people that have dual skill sets, but it is to say it is kind of, to use a corny expression, ham and egg or left leg, right leg. And so there are problems. Certainly there are problems in having a partner. I mean, it's no different than being married to someone. So you need to know, among other things, that you really do see eye to eye, that you have comparable moral and business values. If you don't share those values, your relationship will be torn apart. But yeah, I think that if, let me underline the word if you select the right partner, and if they have a skill set that is not the same as yours, but is complementary, then you probably have the makings for a more successful business than if you're trying to do it all yourself. I have coined the phrase, embrace wisdom wherever you find it. And the story behind that statement is I had been mentoring a young man for 10 years, and we would meet every so often for breakfast. He lived about 25 miles from me, and I said, I'll tell you what, I'm not driving to your town, but if you want to drive here, I'll buy you breakfast. Wow. So we would meet for breakfast, and one day he came to breakfast with this book, and he knew I was an avid reader, and he said, oh, Mark, here's a great book. I think you'll like it. And it was the book Traction by Gino Wickman, which lays out an operating platform to scale a business. And so I flipped through the book and thought it looked pretty interesting. So I went back and ordered a copy. And I knew that within days he'd be calling me and saying, did you get the book and did you read it? So I bought the book and I read it. And sure enough, it is a great book. And so when I called him, I said, oh, I got that book and I read it and it's really great. And he said, did you really like it? And I said, yeah, actually, I really did. And he said, well, would you like to meet the man that's helping us implement that operating platform in our business? And I said, yeah, that would be wonderful. Well, long story short, we wound up implementing what was called is called EOS, Entrepreneurial Operating System, in our business. And I wish someone had introduced me to it 10 years before, because there were simple, basic, I shouldn't say simple, there were basic business principles that I said to myself, man, how did I miss this? How did I not know about this? And so one of the great regrets of my life actually is that I wasn't introduced to Traction 10 years earlier. Wow. So it's really interesting that here was a person who was my, if you will, mentee, who exposed me to some knowledge that was profound, made a profound difference in my career. So when I sold the majority of my business in 2019, and I had no interest in retiring, I decided that I was going to start working with entrepreneurs to help them introduce that type of an organizational calming and benefit to their business.
Wow, that is amazing. You said entrepreneur operating system?
It's called EOS, Entrepreneurial Operating System. The book is Traction by Gino Wickman. Great book. You know, the thing that Gino will tell you in there, which is great, he'll say, you know, there's really no new information in here. These are based on just old business principles that have been around for hundreds of years, which, you know, that really resonated with me. I wasn't looking for something new and she, and what's great about it is there is no new wisdom, but what Gino, to his credit, did is he took a lot of fairly complicated pieces of information and simplified it. And so we were able to benefit it by implementing it in our business. And it really comes down to 6 components. It's, do you have your vision and values? That's kind of slice. If you think of it as a pie and with 6 slices, vision and values, and we can get into that later. Do you have the right people in the right seats? Are you tracking the right data? A lot of businesses, interestingly enough, have no clue where they are on anything. It's just kind of by the seat of their pants. Yeah. Do you have a process in place to solve issues? I always talk about issues as being like black snakes. They crawl around the floor and we kick at them and we step on them and we cuss at them, but we never kill them. Sure. So we don't solve issues. The next would be, do you have processes and procedures in place? And we don't mean, do you have a 600-page binder that no one's ever going to look at, which is really self-defeating. But have you taken in each department those 4 or 5 important policies and reduced them down to a page and a half, where you have, 20% of the information, which is the 80% you need? And then lastly, do you have a cadence? Do you have a method to get traction in your business, which is your weekly and daily meetings that are going to communicate throughout the staff and keep everybody on task? So that was the process we implemented in our business starting back in about 2017, I guess, 2018. And I use the illustration. It's not like flipping a light switch on. You're not just going to just go from one day to the next instantly better. But I use the illustration. It's like stepping out of the shower. And as you're standing in front of the vanity, brushing your teeth, and the mist is lifting off the mirror, you go, oh, I can see my face now. And so over 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year, you're going to see that the business just runs a whole lot better.
Wow, Mark, that is another knowledge bomb. Thank you for that. And I want to ask you, so what have that process, one key that you can share with us from 2017 to 2021? What changes of what relief have you seen?
To answer it real quickly, there are any number of benefits, but one of the words you'll hear much of the time from entrepreneurs, business owners, managers is, I can't keep anybody. No one wants to be accountable. Well, there's a reason for that. Oftentimes, it's because there isn't real clear definition of what the person's job is. There isn't a clear definition of what the expectations are. Oftentimes, Cedric, there isn't any real clear definition of who's even in charge of a given task or responsibility or department. And the way that happens oftentimes is you start out, again, very small, and everybody does everything, right? I mean, that's something actually to applaud when you're young, is everybody does everything. You know, we all pitch in, we all do what it takes. Well, that sounds good when the business is small and new, but when it gets bigger, and then all of a sudden you've got 2 or 3 people running this area, if everybody's in charge, nobody's in charge. And it's kind of like watching a basketball game where, you know, if 2 players go chasing the ball and crash into one another, that's not a good thing. If, on the other hand, the ball goes through, the rebound comes off the rim and 2 guys stand back and just kind of look at it because they figure the other guy's going to grab it, that's not good. Yeah. And so clarity and definition of responsibility is one of the very first things every business needs to do. And it starts out almost uniformly. Small businesses grow and they've got 2 and 3 people in sales. No one's in charge. They've got 2 or 3 people in production. No one's in charge. And there's just confusion. And so when production doesn't run smoothly, who do you talk to? Who do you hold responsible? But if there's one thing that most businesses crave is a lack or is getting clarity of who is being responsible for what and when. And when you introduce an operating system, you go through all of those components one at a time, and you just get your business organized, and you know why you're in business, and you get the right people in the right seats, and you start tracking the right data, and you start working off your issues, and you have methods to get standardized production or consistency in the processes. And you don't have to be a genius to figure out, gosh, if I could do that, my business would probably run a whole lot better. Embarrassing story. I took an organizational assessment, and at the end of this show, I would offer to send an organizational assessment to anyone that wants to send me an email. It's 100-point questionnaire. It's like 25 questions. It takes about, 5 minutes to take it. When I took a similar questionnaire back in 2017, whenever, my score was an embarrassing 25 or 28 out of 100. That's the bad news. That's pretty embarrassing, actually. The good news is if you start doing some fundamental steps and following the roadmap, within a couple of years, you can be at 80 or 85. It's just a matter of following the roadmap.
You said a lot of things. You talked about clarity. To me, this seems like a communication issue within the organization, even within the individuals. Let me ask you this question. What is the secret to great communication?
So start out and be thinking you're looking at a whiteboard or blackboard, whatever, and there are 2 dots. One's you and one's me. And it's pretty simple organization. It's just the 2 of us. We're communicating. So there's an arrow to you and an arrow back to me. So that's very simple bidirectional communication. Now let's add a 3rd dot. We'll make kind of a triangle here. So there's a arrow between you and me. There's a arrow from me to the new person. There's an arrow from you to the new person. So now we've got 3 arrows going back and forth. So we've added only 1 person, but we've increased our communication complexity by 200%. Now add a 4th dot. So now thinking not in terms of a triangle, but in terms of a rectangle. And now start drawing lines between all of those 4 parties. You now have 12 lines of communication. So you've gone from a very simple bidirectional to now you have 4 people. That's a pretty small organization, I might add. And yet you've gone from 2 directions to 12 directions. Think of the number of ball drops that can happen. That is where people say pretty quickly, I didn't know that. I hadn't heard that. I wasn't told that. And that is when customers start getting unhappy. That's when clients start leaving because there was a ball drop. And that is in a very small group. You now take that out to 10, 12, 15, 20, 30 employees, still not a real big organization. You have got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of directional arrows going. So unless you have standard communication, unless you have what I would call an all points bulletin a couple times a week so that everybody knows the new process, the new procedures, the new part numbers, the new vendors, there will be consistently and constantly people saying, I didn't know. So my first rule of thumb would be in communication, to answer your question, Cedric, is you have to be intentional. You have to be intentional. You can't just say, well, we're just great communicators. That's a non-statement. You have to be intentional. So as an example, if you have a weekly leadership meeting, at the end of the leadership meeting, you need to say around the table, so what information is coming out of this meeting, whether it's about employees, about policies, about product, about clients, what items do we need to make sure are disseminated uniformly to everyone in the organization? Not a big deal really to do, but you have to be intentional about it and you have to be consistent about it. You can't just do it once every 6 months. If you do it every week, you are going to hear a lot fewer, I didn't know that's. That's number one. Number two, I think in general, we tend to be very sloppy in our communication. Think about how people text messages and they use acronyms and letters that you've never heard before. Yeah, send me over 3 of the TMJs and we'll send you back 5 PPQs. And you're thinking, I don't know any of that. That means nothing to me. That is shorthand for lazy. Now, I'm not saying you should never use abbreviation, but what I am saying is just understand as the communicator, as the person who is broadcasting the message, you own it. You own it. It is not up to the listener. It is not up to the recipient of the email. It is not up to the recipient of the text message to divine what the sender is saying. So if there is confusion, the sender owns it. And so I think we need to take ownership of our communication and quit being so sloppy. Now I'll get off my high horse.
Wow. I'm listening to you, and I recall a company, so many acronyms, you had to go to an alphabet soup to be able to understand all the acronyms. And it's like, as new hires get on, it's like you have to remember 200-300 different acronyms instead of just using the word. And I literally experienced this. And it's definitely confusing, frustrating, and aggravating, and all at the same time.
So if you tie it back to the statement, be intentional, that means you need to think about, is the message I'm sending, whether it's a text message, a spoken message, email, or a memo, is this clear? Is it saying, is the recipient going to be able to understand this? And and by the way, is it going to everybody that needs to know?
That's good. And you're saying a lot here, Mark. You're saying a lot here. I love it. And I know the Lead to Greatness audience is writing down and taking lots of notes. What is one practical thing every organization can do tomorrow that will make things run more smoothly?
Well, it's really interesting. And thank you for asking that question, because this is going to come as good news to most every organization. It's simple. It's quick. It costs you nothing. And that is, ask your leadership team to join you for a 12-minute stand-up meeting. And here's the tip. If you start work, as an example, at 8:00, don't say we're going to meet at 8:00. Say we're going to meet at 7:57 or 8:02. So it becomes emblazoned in their mind that it is a specific time to the minute. Part A. Part B, give it a name. Don't just say, well, we're going to have our stand-up meeting. If you're a law firm, as an example, you might call it the morning brief. If you are, as one of the clients in the Midwest, has compressed gas, you have to, if you have hydrogen under pressure, you need to regulate that. So they have their meeting, they call it pressure release.
Wow.
So every morning at 7:47, they have the pressure release. Well, you can see there's some fun in that. It also gives it a personality. But let me tell you what happens. So everybody shows up in the leadership team. And the leadership team is probably 3 to 5, maybe 8 people. And you're not there to do anything but 3 things. Talk about what you did yesterday. Just say, okay, yesterday I was doing XYZ. So that means everybody in the circle now knows about it. Today I'm doing ABC, and here's where I'm stuck. When you say, here's where I'm stuck, or this is what I'm hung up on, that doesn't mean that the meeting is there for everybody to jump in and try to solve it. But it means if you tell me you are having a problem with getting the IT system up and running, at least now everybody in the room, everybody in that group knows the struggle. So they know there's this problem on the horizon. And there is that possibility at the end of the meeting, one of your colleagues might step over and say, hey, Cedric, I heard you mention in our team meeting that you're having, let me tell you, here's a guy to call. So there is that kind of side potential benefit, but that's not the primary one. So what does it do? Number one, I have clients tell me, it's really interesting. Ever since we started this, we find people getting here on time. When we start our meeting at 7:47, suddenly people that were coming in at 8:15, 8:30, 8:45, they're here at 7:47 because they know that's when the meeting is. So that's one benefit. A second benefit is the fact that now everybody knows what's going on and there's a certain tempo that starts to pick up in the office. A third benefit is if I know I'm going to see you tomorrow morning, Cedric, at 7:47 and it's 3:00 in the afternoon, I'm not going to spend time getting up, walking in your office, interrupting you, which means I broke my time, broke your time. I'll say to myself, oh gosh, I don't need to bother him. I'll see Cedric tomorrow morning at the stand-up meeting, and I'll just ask him then. So there's this efficiency of people will see each other at a fixed time. It means they don't have to interrupt each other as much. They have a quick round of communication. It gets the tempo of the organization going quickly and punctually at no cost.
Mark, that is another knowledge bomb. Something that you mentioned early, and I just want to dig a little bit more into it. Why are visions and core values so important?
Cedric, if you'd asked me that question 10 years ago, I probably would have said, yeah, I suppose. But that sure sounds like an academic talking. That sounds like some professor in a business school. My whole view on that has changed 180 degrees. And I'll tell you why. Vision is really nothing more than saying, where are we going? And core values, I don't actually like that term very much because core values sounds to me like something that is sacred and should be etched on a wall. And I have realized, and I always say to people, core values should not be a noun. They need to be a verb. They need to be action. They need to be characteristics. Because really what you're saying, Cedric, is what are the core qualities I want to see in myself and in my colleagues? And so if you don't know what those behaviors are, if you don't know what those qualities are, you won't be able to interview for them and hire for them. And I love to tell the story of an organization here in the Pacific Northwest called Les Schwab Tires. And it is legendary in its service. If you were to pull into a Les Schwab tire store, as you pull in and park your car and you're picking your phone up off the seat and you're getting your car keys and you're kind of collecting yourself, you turn and, oh my gosh, there's a young man standing outside of your car. And he'll either motion for you to roll down your window, or he'll step back knowing you're going to open your door. And he'll say, as you step out, well, good morning, sir. How can I help you? That is called hustle. That is one of their top 3 core values. And if hustle is something that's important to you, then you have to identify it and celebrate it. Because if you hire 50, 100, 200 people and hustle wasn't something that you were interviewing for, I can guarantee you the majority of those people will not have hustle as one of their core qualities. So when it comes to core qualities, I say limit it to 3. Yeah, it could be 4 maybe. But if you said, well, we've got 20, they become so diluted, you don't know what it is you're really looking for. But if you say, these are the 3 that we hire for, we want people, and here's just an example. We want people who are really friendly. I was told a story even yesterday about a fella who is in Philadelphia who I don't know if you're familiar with the Wawa company, but they were a dairy, I believe, and they also have some convenience stores. And he told the story. I think this is just great. He told the story that every day he goes to the Wawa store and he fills his Wawa coffee mug with Wawa coffee. And one day he went in, and he's been doing this for years, and he opened the lid and he went, "Oh, yuck." And it was a Monday morning, and he had forgotten that on Friday he had dunked a cookie in his coffee, and now it had melted in there and mushed, and it had kind of dried up, and his coffee mug looked putrid. And he said, "I don't know why I didn't just go to the men's room and wash it out, but I said to the clerk, 'Hey, could you put some hot water in this?' And she said, 'Oh, let me take that. I'll wash it out.' So he said she took the cup, filled it with hot water, put in some soap, scrub, rinsed it out, put some more soap in, scrub, washed it out, rinsed it out, toweled it off, and handed it back to him. And he went and got his favorite coffee. And he said, when I got back to the office, she was so friendly. And that was one of their leading qualities for Wawa. We hire friendly people. Wow. He sat down on his computer and he wrote Wawa and said, I just want to let you know what delightful service I had. And he identified the store and the clerk. 2 days later, he got a message back that said, "Dear sir, we so appreciate you sending us this message. We wanted you to know that it has been forwarded to the district manager where this lady works, and everyone in her division has been awarded a spot bonus."
Wow.
And that was because that was a core value, and they wanted to reinforce it, and they made it worth their while. You're going to get the kind of behavior that you acknowledge and you hire for and you reward. Here is a tip from Patrick Lencioni. He said, there are only 3 things you need to know about a person when you hire them. First of all, are they humble? Number 2, are they hungry? And number 3, are they smart? And if they pass those 3 tests, they'll be a rock star. And when you think about it, he says, if they're not humble, if they're arrogant, even though they're hungry and they're smart, you don't want them. They're going to just decimate your culture. On the other hand, if they're humble, but they're not hungry, they're not going to get any work done. Thirdly, if they're humble and hungry, but they're not smart, they're of no benefit to you. The tip would be, when you're hiring, are they humble? Are they hungry? And are they smart? And then when someone says to me, so how do you find that out? I quickly say, get them out of the interview environment. Take them to a ball game. Take them to lunch. One story Patrick tells about a fellow who would take every employee that he was thinking about hiring to lunch, and he would tell the waiter to mess up their order. He wanted to see how this prospective employee, would treat the waiter. Was he arrogant? Was he kind? Was he thoughtful? Was he accommodating? He suddenly wasn't in an interview environment, or at least he didn't think he was. And so his real personality would come out. So that would be a tip I would share with people.
Oh, man. A knowledge bomb to go. Man, Mark. This is awesome. Awesome interview. I'm definitely excited. And the Lead to Greatness community is excited as well. If someone wanted to connect with you and what you're doing, where should they go?
They can get a hold of me by sending me an email at Mark, M-A-R-K, at Coach Rockwell, CoachRockwell.com. Or you can go to my website, which is coachrockwell.com.
And you talked about something earlier.
Organizational assessment.
Let's talk about that again. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, it'll be a questionnaire. It's just very simple. Just send me an email, and no obligation. I'll just email it back to you, and you can take a self-assessment. It'll take you about 5 minutes to answer 20 questions. And depending on what your score is, you're going to know whether you're a rock star or you have the opportunity to become a rock star.
I love it. Mark, awesome. On behalf of the Lead to Greatness community, I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule and adding value to us.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and I would love to come back whenever you'd have me.
And don't forget to subscribe to Lead to Greatness if this is your first time. And if this podcast was helpful to you, leave a big thumbs up. And also, I want you to check out our Marriage Coach podcast, the podcast with my wife and I. If you're on iTunes, please rate this podcast and leave a review and help get the word out. Again, thank you, Lead to Greatness Nation, for joining us on today. Looking forward to seeing you again on next week. Till then, remember, if you help others reach their greatest potential, together we can change the world. Peace. We out.